Hi, thank you for joining us today at Love Church.
You can keep up to date with all the latest on all our social media platforms.
Now, here's today's message.
Here's the true story. The son of a mafia boss, just 7 years of age, is instructed by his dad, it's time to write your Christmas letter, but we're the mafia and we're Catholic. Don't write that letter to Santa, he's a Protestant. Write the letter to Jesus. Jesus is a good Catholic. So the mafia, 7-year-old son of the mafia boss goes into his bedroom and his dad says, don't post that letter till you've showed me it. So he goes into his bedroom, just like you did when you were a kid, and writes, Dear Jesus, I have been a good boy all year. No, that's not strictly true, is it? Not been a good boy all year at all. Crumples it up, starts the next letter. Dear Jesus, I have been a good boy most of the year, so I would like it. No, that's not exactly true either. I've not even been a good boy most of the year. And he starts to fret and he's worried and he thinks, my dad will be back any minute and I haven't written my Christmas letter to Jesus. What would my dad do? What would my dad do? And then he has an idea. So he goes into his mother's bedroom. On his mother's bedroom dressing table, there's a beautiful little statue of the Virgin Mary. He takes that statue of the Virgin Mary, he wraps it up in a tea towel, he puts it in a cupboard in his bedroom, locks the cupboard, and starts his letter again. Dear Jesus, I have your mother. If you want to see her again, you will bring me a bike for Christmas. He shows the letter to his father, and his father says, son, you can have any bike you want. That is the best mafia child letter I've ever seen in my life. 3 words that change everything. Listen to this verse from Isaiah chapter 7. Here's the 14th verse. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. She will call his name Emmanuel. And there's the 3 words that change everything. God with us. Many people think the biggest miracle of Christmas was the virgin birth. It wasn't. The biggest miracle of Christmas was that God had become a man. But before you can become a man, you have to be a boy. And before you become a boy, you have to be a baby. Here is the most important birth of the most important person that ever lived and still lives. Massive scale, proportionate scale. Human history is full of epic moments, but none as epic as this one. 1/5 of the planet back in the 60s watched the moon landings live on TV. Astronaut James Irwin, having returned from the moon, said this: the most significant achievement of our age is not that man stood on the moon, but rather that God in Jesus stood upon the earth. You're probably very familiar with the Christmas story. If you're like me, I love it. But it's also tinged with a bit of frustration because everywhere I go at Christmas, I struggle to find Jesus in the story anymore. I can find Santa. I can find Elf on the shelf. I can find cream eggs. I found cream eggs the other day. All my Christmases came at once. The Easter sweetie is out. I can find tinsel. I can find trees. If we're fortunate at Christmas, we might even come across a little bit of snow. Maybe we'll make a snowman. I can find all sorts of things. But what about God with us? If God is with us, where is he in all of our plans and preparations for Christmas? It's a serious, serious omission. But when we think about the Christmas story, has it ever occurred to us to think of it this way? Jesus is God. Another 3-word truth. If Jesus is God, then Jesus is the only person that's ever been born who could plan the exact details, timing of events of his own birth. Now, men, you won't be able to sympathize with this. Some of the women will. When women are pregnant and the time is getting close, they plan those moments meticulously. And then when the moment really happens, it all goes out the window. And we're just glad to get the moment past. But everything is meticulous. There's a bag in the boot of the car. There's more food in the freezer than could feed a small country. We've planned work, we've saved up holidays, we're ready to go. But all of our plans are well-intentioned until the moment happens. You didn't plan the moment of your birth. For some, sadly, they couldn't plan the circumstances of their birth. For many, their life was a dream in the future, and suddenly the future's here, and the plan and what they see in front of them is not the same thing. God himself became a baby who became a boy who became a man, who was the Savior and the Lord, and he was the only person that could ever plan the timing and the details and the circumstances of his own birth. What does that say about God? The most famous birth of the most famous person. All right, let's offend more religions and denominations, shall we? There's a school teacher in a little school in Paisley, an extremely diverse school. Kids from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and all nations go there. One day the teacher decides it's time to have a quiz cause it's Christmas. And so she holds up a £5 note and says, kids, we're going to have a quiz. Fastest hand first will get this £5 that gives me the right answer. And here's the question, and the question is, to the class full of diverse kids, who's the most famous person who ever lived? Whoosh! Up goes a little Indian girl's hand. Who's the most famous person that ever lived? Gandhi. The teacher says, well, that's a very good answer, but it's not the correct answer. Whoosh! A little French kid puts his hand up. Who's the most famous person alive, Pierre? Napoleon. Well, that's a good answer, but it's not the right answer. Whoosh! A Jewish kid's hand goes up. Who's the most famous person who ever lived, Isaac? Well, obviously, miss, it's Jesus. Well, Isaac, that is the right answer. Here's your £5. But I never expected a Jewish kid to say Jesus. Well done. And as he takes the £5 note, Isaac looks at the teacher and looks at the class and says, do you know, miss, you're right. I know the answer to your question was actually Abraham. But as you said, I'm Jewish, and business is business. Only Jesus could be involved in the plans of his own birth. He chose for his mother. You didn't choose yours. He chose for his mother an unmarried teenager who was living in obscurity and most likely poverty. She was a young maiden, a virgin, never had relations, betrothed to a man the stage before engagement. Her life was mapped out for her. She didn't know when she was walking the streets of where she lived that she had been chosen to be the mother of God. I wonder what's going on in your heart today and you don't know you've been chosen for something. Wonder what plans you're making. Wonder what business you're going about. Wonder what routines you're following. And yet the God who could plan his own birth in life has planned your birth in life from beginning to end. Here's this girl. Most scholars say she's between 13 and 17. Girls were married off younger than that, but this is the Christmas story. She was betrothed, engaged to be married, pre-engagement really, to a carpenter who was much older than us. We don't know the circumstances of how they met. We don't know the arrangements between the families, but we do know this. The circumstances were designed in heaven before they were played out on earth. And this is what happens. God, King of Kings, Lord and Lords, Savior prophesied from Genesis onwards, chose to be born to poor people. Sometimes people tell me, well, you know, Jesus was a carpenter. His father was a carpenter. The word in the original Greek means general builder. That's true. So therefore, his dad was a construction manager. He would have had a decent wage. Not necessarily so. 8 days after Jesus' birth, as is the custom of Jewish people, they take him to the temple where he will be in dedication to God. And then they will make a sacrifice, dedicating their child to the Lord. And here's what happens. The Bible records this for us. You can find it in the Gospels. They take with them not what is expected, a lamb for the sacrifice. They take A dove. The New Testament, well, the New Testament tells us the story, but the Old Testament reveals the circumstances. If you were bringing an offering to the Lord and you couldn't afford a lamb, then you were permitted to bring a dove, a bird that was cheaper, more affordable for poor people. And even further than this, if you couldn't afford the dove, you were allowed to share it, the sacrifice, with other poor families. This is not the sacrifice of rich people. Not only that, Jesus chooses for the circumstance of his birth to be born in a cave, a stable, a barn attached to a house in some way where the animals would be brought in the cold weather. Hardly the circumstances we're allowed to give birth to in these days. There's no dung on your maternity ward. There's no flies, I hope there's not. There's no flies flying around. There's no horrible smells in your ward. And here is Jesus, who chose the circumstances of his birth, choosing to be born not only in obscurity, but in hideous circumstances. God is sending a message right from the very first Christmas story. The circumstances of your birth don't determine the destiny and outcome of your life. Your circumstances are part of the story that make you become who you need to be in order to minister and reach those you minister and reach to. And who did Jesus prefer as he grew up? Who was he always seeking out? The poor. He was criticized for it. Some would even say he was murdered for it. But it's not like that today. There's a couple of famous couples I want to point out to you. I don't think they're in the room today. We should be all right. Jay-Z and Beyonce, are you here? Saw some of your moves during the Christmas show from the kids. You think you're Beyonce. They chose, for the birth of their children, Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. Lenox Hill Hospital has luxurious suites for maternity with mahogany walls, hardwood floors, luxurious linens. You get your own kitchen. While you're going through labour, you can order a haircut, a manicure, a pedicure, or a massage. And they'll give you it all for the princely sum of $2,500 a day. You think they're elaborate. If you'd have been present at the birth of Gwyneth Paltrow's kids, you would have been impressed even more. She chose Mount Sinai Hospital for the birth of her children because of its stunning views of Central Park. £4,000 a day gets you the privilege of giving birth to your children in Mount Sinai Hospital, Manhattan, New York. But right at the top of the hospital birthing experience is a hospital called Matilda Hospital in Hong Kong. Your room has a balcony overlooking an ocean. You get your personal doctor, personal gynecologist, personal obstetrician, and the rooms are booked 7 months in advance. And they won't let you book a room unless you pay a £20,000 deposit to have your children there. And yet the only person who's ever lived who could plan the circumstances of his coming, the timing of his coming, the whereabouts of his coming, chose obscurity, chose poverty, so that nobody could look at his birth and say it wasn't for me. When he's born the lowest, the only way is up. And if the only way is up, everybody can be impacted by the Christmas story, not just for 2 weeks in December, but all throughout the year. You can meet Jesus at any point. But let's talk about those 3 words. God with us. Can I get a witness? God with us. Say it with me.
God with us.
You probably noticed because of my speech impediment, I say witness like that all year round anyway. But here we are, witnesses to the circumstance in which God invites himself into the world to do the only thing that only he can do. Isaiah 7:14. The virgin will conceive. Somebody that can't give birth will give birth. And give birth to a son. You can have a gender reveal, but I don't think we're at the point yet where you can have a gender choice. And they will call his name Emmanuel, which simply means God with us. Well, we could focus on those 3 words, but maybe we'll just focus for a little while on the middle word, with. Let's talk about with. Let's talk about witness. Not God above us, not God beyond us, but God with us. Why is with so important? With makes all the difference in your life. A few years ago, a national report, and this is going back a few years now, showed that 9 million people, 14% of the population at the time, were being honest enough to say they always felt lonely. How many of you know that when governments release statistics, they shape those statistics to suit themselves? If it says at that time 14% of the population constantly felt lonely, I would raise that to perhaps a quarter, maybe even higher. People feel lonely because they lack with. In response to this statistic in 2018, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain, Theresa May, made the country, the UK, the first in the world to have a ministry, a department, and a minister for loneliness. You can't manufacture witness. You're either with or you're without. And here we are at Christmas. And what's it all about? It's about being with friends, or wishing you could be. It's about being with family, or wishing you could be. And here we are. If my stats, which I just made up, are more accurate, then 25% of the population feel lonely all year round. How much more so at this time of year? We are living in a period in history where globally there is an epidemic of withoutness. People are lonely, they are isolated. For some, it will be a year to recall painful memories. For some, it will be a season of the year to regret things. For others, there will be people that they miss. For some, it will be their first Christmas without somebody who never made it to Christmas this year. Bereavement produces loneliness. For others, it will be their first year divorced or separated. I can remember the first Christmas where my kids weren't round our table because a divorce had happened, a separation had took place, and they were now living in a different place. The anticipation of Boxing Day was amazing, but the reality of Christmas Day was different. And when people say Christmas, New Year, Hogmanay, the festive period is not the same anymore, what they're really saying is I don't feel the same sense of witness. I don't feel the same sense of connection. Maybe for single people, they watch all of their friends going off to do their thing with their families and they think, what about me? Maybe for people that have just arrived in the country and they're fighting for visas or somewhere to live and they don't know the language well and they don't know people yet and their family that they would do Christmas with is thousands and thousands of miles away, perhaps even fighting for survival in those far off places. There's a withoutness. No one wants to admit to being lonely. Single members of my family say, I'll be fine. I don't want any fuss. But they're lonely. And the worst thing is being alone at Christmas. But it's bad enough being alone the rest of the year. No one wants to be the kid in the school canteen eating by themselves, and nobody wants to be the person in the living room with the TV dinner at Christmas. Do you know how fortunate you are if you've got somebody to spend Christmas with? In the movie Forrest Gump, Forrest gets on the school bus every day, and every day no one will let him sit beside him. Every time he sees a gap and goes to plant himself down, they say, that seat's taken. And he moves further up the coach. That seat's taken. You can't sit there. Beat it, freak. And then eventually a girl called Jenny comes and says, the seat beside me is free. Forrest's whole countenance changed because he's no longer alone. He's now with Jenny. It's a temporary reprieve for loneliness and withoutness. But there's a kind of loneliness that's so deep that the truth is no other human being can take it away. You can be in a room full of people and feel like you're alone. You can be round a tree with family, round a table with family, and feel like you're alone if the witness that Christmas came to bring has not infected and touched your heart yet. You can be with, yet still feel without. And people have thought about this, and people have debated this, and people have researched this. Several have made conclusions that are morbid and depressing. Jean-Paul Sartre, the great French philosopher, said the reason we're all lonely is we keep seeking meaning, and the world is meaningless. What a conclusion to reach, that everything you do has no point to it at all. Richard Dawkins, the angry English atheist, wrote a few years ago that the reason we're so lonely is that the universe offers us nothing. No design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. He then goes on to claim that having come to terms with that, he's living a full and enjoyable life. Being qualified, being scholarly does not make you honest. And in the heart of every human being, there's a hole where witness should be, or there's a hole where a gap that witness has filled. And only the God that can choose his birth, the circumstances, the timing, the place, and the whereabout can choose to fill that hole in our hearts. So Jean-Paul Sartre, you're wrong. Richard Dawkins, you're wrong. Christmas reveals that it doesn't have to be like that for you, regardless of your education, your background, your upbringing, or your conclusions. God is on a mission, and with has become the mission of God. The central theme of the Bible is God's desire to be with. Aren't you glad God is love? My goodness, you all have people that you don't love. Don't look at me like that, you know it's true. And they're coming to your table at Christmas and you don't want them there. But you feel an obligation, you feel you have to, and I don't know how long you'll have them, but from the moment they arrive, you're hoping that they'll go. Come on, true or false? And I'm getting paranoid now. Am I that person? Am I going somewhere and they don't want me to go and they don't want me to stay? I'm staying home. Anybody want me for Christmas? Lois, we come as a package. She washes and I dry. "114 times in the Old Testament just, God speaks and says, I will be with you. 114 times in the Old Testament, God says, I will be with you. You now have the Word of God complete in your folder in your hand. That's 114 times a day. God reminds you, I will be with you. Stuck in traffic on the Kingston Bridge, I'm with you. Late deliveries to your work causing pressure on your sales, I will be with you. Running up and down that supermarket line on Christmas Eve, trying to find your bird, not your bird, your turkey. Lastminute.com. I know what some of you are like. I'm not doing Christmas, I'm not doing Christmas, it's Christmas Eve, we better get a turkey, a tree, and off you go. There was a girl in the Morrisons at Christmas Eve. And last minute she's decided she's having Christmas. So she's pulling through all the turkeys, trying to find one big enough for her family. And she grabs the wee guy that's pushing around his trolley stacking the shelves and says, do these turkeys get any bigger? He said, I don't think so, madam, they're dead. 114 times a day, I will be with you. Emmanuel, God with us. The virgin will conceive, give birth to a son, and we'll call his name Emmanuel. And that's Christmas. God does not want anyone sitting at the table alone in the cafeteria. The biggest miracle of them all was the smallest. God's greatness compacted into a frail human body. And because Jesus is Emmanuel, the word with becomes the theme of his life. He comes to be with people, and he starts with a poor peasant teenager called Mary. Then he begins to gather his motley crew. In Mark chapter 3, it says he appointed 12 that they might be with him. Jesus is with beggars, he's with lepers, he's with foreigners, he's with sinners, he's with tax collectors, he's with prostitutes. He wore the title like a badge of honor. The word with, there was the one thing that got him killed. They did not want to be with him. He cried over those that rejected him. He grieved over those that couldn't see him. He hung out with the wrong people. They crucified him, and on the third day, he rose again. And let me end today's message with his last words to those he was with. Surely I am with you, always, to the very end of the age. He came to us at Christmas so that we could be with him forever. I know I've said it before. You'll indulge me if I say it again. Christmas, Easter, your birth, my birth, your funeral, my funeral, your big birthdays, your everyday birthdays, your ordinary routines of life, it never has been nor never will it ever be about you. It's about him. I'd invite all the dignitaries, invite all the family, invite all the friends. Have a beautiful Christmas round your table. But God is with us at Christmas. When you're pulling your crackers, when you're fighting over the hats, you want to wear the red one, you want to wear the blue one, you won't wear one at all. Remember, God is with us at Christmas. When you're looking at the last piece of turkey or the last wee sausage with bacon round it on the plate, and you're thinking, Jeff is going to attack that if I don't get in first, remember, God is with us. The mother brings in the selection box. The kids have been a mix-up. There's only one. For Christmas, she's got 2 sons. So she brings in the selection box and says, I'm so sorry, boys, there's only one selection box. I don't know what happened. But there's only one. What will we do? And the boys are looking at each other and, I don't want to share it. I don't want to share it. And the boys look at each other and they start to argue and the mother says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Do you know, if Jesus was here, he would give the selection box to his brother. And the older brother looks at the younger brother and says, I agree with Mum. You be Jesus.
We hope you have enjoyed today's message.
For more information on Love Church Scotland, please visit us at www.lovechurch.scot. Thanks for listening.